So I'm delighted now to introduce our panelists for the session on urban ecology. And we have here Dan Burwood, who's one of the two co-founders of Fruit and Nut Village. They've planted amazingly 600 trees in the last planting season across the locality here. We've also got Abbas, Shah, who was the project manager for an amazing project, Balsall Heath Nature Map. And Shaheen, who was one of the artists involved with that. So we've only got a half-hour session, so I'm just going to hand straight over. Please welcome Dan Burwood.
Thanks very much. Is that the right volume and distance and pace of words? I'd love to say that we had planted 600 trees in Balsall Heath over the last winter. And I hope that will be the case in years to come. But it's a bit less than that. But I'm the Balsall Heath area manager, so I'm the Fruit and Nut Village's sort of pre-existing project that this is a kind of an extension of, if you like. A bit closer. Forgive me if I ramble a little bit, but I have got notes. So, does anybody know approximately how many apple varieties there are that are kind of British, I guess, or from these islands?
Any suggestions? Shout out any numbers. Anyone? How many apple varieties?
Higher.
Higher?
700.
Higher.
2,000.
Thanks, John. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah, indeed. There are about 2,000, and we were talking from the last panel was talking about heritage, and I kind of started with that point because this is also a kind of heritage, right? The plants that people have learned to grow and grown with and adapted and bred and the rest of it. Now, the apples come from Kazakhstan, right? And I think they've, they've been in these islands for, probably a dozen centuries or more. But they don't grow without a kind of being part of an ecosystem that includes people. So we intervene a lot in their growth, and apples are quite hard work in many ways. In some of the ways that we conventionally grow them. Now, this might seem a little bit off topic, but I was reading a biography at a certain point. I didn't finish it, of John Clare, the poet, and apparently the house that he grew up in, which was a rented house, there were tenants, had a big russet apple tree in the garden. And the year that the harvest of that tree failed, it didn't produce any apples, was the year they got, his family were kicked out of the house. But I think this is when he wasn't living there. And that, I guess, the breakdown of that relationship was part of, indirectly, I suppose, what contributed to what happened to John Clare in his later life, and contributed to sort of the documentation of the loss of ecology that was, or the breaking of the relationship between people and land and ecology that was sort of occasioned by the clearings, not the clearings, the kind of the taking of the common land that was shared by people and was helped to meet their needs locally. There's a we used to, so the culture of how to help to meet needs through local ecosystems, ecologies and systems is kind of been lost to a certain extent. I was reading Hamlet, the book about an imagination of the relation, Shakespeare's son down in Stratford, and part of it, there's a particular scene takes place in a shed on a farm which had apple racks ranged around the walls. These are things that we don't, they're not part of our infrastructure anymore. Although I think I heard somebody had built them under the floorboards in their retrofitted house somewhere around these parts. And there's an apple called the May Queen, which is apparently the favourite apple of is it Wade Muggeridge, who's an apple expert from down Worcestershire way, which presumably it's not a reference to the Led Zeppelin number, but it comes from, it will last till May. You pick it in December, it will last till May, right? So all of this is probably a distracting prelude to kind of thinking about, I guess, the recent inheritance of available edible plants has been greatly distorted by the industrialisation of food systems. Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, who originated permaculture in the early 70s in Australia, were saying then that the most destructive systems that we are authors of are the agricultural ones. And I think they weren't saying ecologically destructive systems, or that sort of elided from that pronouncement, because they were kind of starting from the point at which we can't escape how integrated our needs are with, the ecological systems that define life on Gaia or Earth, or however you want to phrase it. I was thinking, so I looked at just this sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm sure people are more on top of the data than I am, but I come across, agriculture, forestry and land use, apparently, about 18.4% of carbon emissions globally, and transport, 73.2%. So assuming that there's carbon used in the transport of food, that's kind of quite a big amount of externalizing of waste from these systems, to put it in kind of permaculture type terms. So the systems that we've inherited for kind of feeding ourselves and for dealing with waste are kind of pretty persuasive. Again, forgive me, because I've not been around yesterday and this morning, so if I'm repeating stuff, anyway. So yeah, energy, sewerage, transport, because of they're the dominant paradigm, so they take up the space, and it's not like you kind of have the choice in many situations. But the other reason is that we kind of, they present products instead of processes, right? So you don't just, an apple's not a discrete object, although it's presented as this in its supermarket kind of, plastic packaging, like they'll outlive the apple and the tree. It's part of a kind of a fluid and ongoing and dynamic interaction between, a set of people and a set of other organisms and systems, right? Yeah. Another point that made me, so in terms of retrofit, John and I sat putting our shoes on after having a swim in the other baths next door. I've had a couple of conversations, I think. Maybe it feels like a couple of conversations, it might just be one, about the relationship between retrofit and the work that Fruit and Nut is trying to do around Birmingham and particularly around Balsall Heath. That the housing systems externalise waste and kind of and so do food systems. And so it would be really nice to we hope to be working alongside each other and the residents of the area and the city and wherever else, to kind of think about how orchard growing and forest gardening and I guess other things that kind of permaculture thinking can lead to can complement each other and can kind of serve better the needs of the community, and not just in a kind of material sense, but in a kind of in a human sense as well. So has anyone read the Humanure Handbook? So it's a good one. So part of in the book, at the beginning, this is sort of a history of kind of human waste systems, right? And somebody in there, I'm parsing, but posits the kind of a black box look at how we deal with, sewage, right? And what he comes up with, I guess, is that we get really, really clean water, and we get really, really dirty waste. We mix it together, and we spread it as far as we can from its the source of production, which is, if you look at it in a kind of, in that sense, sort of objectively, it's totally insane, right? And we've got this at the moment. We're kind of experiencing, all of the kind of the pollution problems in the rivers and all of this kind of stuff. It's the same for, chicken farms in the Wye Valley and whatever, right? This is a system that objectively doesn't make sense. I mean, I was thinking about the kind of that you were talking, Chris, about the kind of the retrofitting of terraced houses, right? The kind of, plumbing and heating infrastructure is also retrofit, but from a different era. I know this doesn't sound like it's about urban ecology anymore, but it, to a certain extent, it seems, if it seems crazy that nobody in all the kind of, contemporary media conversations about river pollution, nobody's talking about, like composting toilets, like, I mean, again, it's almost like it's like taboo, but it's a sort of a different question. However, these systems exist. People are envisaging, the possibility of nuclear fusion being a viable energy source. And we're, building a supposedly extraordinarily slowly and wastefully building a possibly faster railway from Birmingham to London, but no one's talking about that, right? I digress. So Robert Hart grew in, I think, Wenlock Edge, the first specifically designed forest garden in a temperate climate, right? And that's what, 25 miles from here. All of this stuff is very possible, like having a kind of thinking in a. So what we're trying to do with Fruit Nut Village, to a certain extent, is trying to think a little bit about how to challenge the existing paradigms of kind of food production, but also green space use, but also like how communities interact around the meeting of their needs locally. On the Plants for a Future database, there are about 7,000 useful plants listed. So these are, meet various needs. Could be like, I don't know, not all food, other sorts of needs. But that's then, most of our food on the planet comes from what, like 10 or something like that, right? Which, is not necessarily for reasons that are in our collective interests. So, I know I'm not talking about Fruit Nut Village. If you want to, so there's there's some illustrations of stuff we've done, of sessions we've run locally, and you can see what we do from kind of social media associated with it. So it's Fruit Nut Village on Twitter and on, what's the other one? Instagram. But I was just going to say that, just in conclusion, I think some of the permaculture thinking, I guess, has changed since the early 1970s. So agriculture was posited as a really destructive force globally. That's still the case if you think about deforestation in the Amazon, for example. Now, there's a lot of, I think people now maybe sort of reframing that question, because the barriers to change are behavioural, like how people imagine their interactions with the wider, with the global ecology and the world, and the implication of individual actions in relation to climate breakdown, ecological crisis, the rest of it. And that's not to say that I'm not unaware of the greenwashing and the kind of carbon footprint kind of like controversy and stuff like that, because again, it's the people who do have power haven't been acting in our best interests for a very long time, right? So yeah, the sort of thinking about like how people, the heart, or the kind of how do you what's the relationship with your neighbours implied with the actions that you take on any kind of scale. I don't mean to sound evangelical. I'm not. But the thing that got me started interested in permaculture, my dad had a copy of the permaculture a designer's manual, which you can get as a PDF on the internet. Really interesting book, quite uncompromising, quite heavy in many ways. But there's an illustration of an ecological swimming pool between pages 179 and 181. And I always had that in my head as a thing to sort of, this is like a utopian idea that could be aspired to, I suppose. And fittingly being in a swimming pool that is being repurposed, I think it kind of made sense to kind of finish talking about these things. But that's just these things exist. This is a drawing, and I think the thing that I've struggled a little bit with sort of permaculture is how to be utopian and practical at the same time. And what we're trying to do with Fruit and Nut Village is a little bit of that, I guess. So if you're local and you want to kind of find out a little bit more about what we do, please follow us or get in touch through the kind of available channels. And if you would like some Asturian tree cabbage seeds, I have a jar of them that that I harvested from a plant that somebody gave me, my friend Carolyn Morton. Anyway, cheers.
Huge thanks to Dan and Fruit and Nut Village, and the point you make about the ecological pool, I just want to pick up on, because we're in the pool and it was a beautiful way to finish. But I think if we look at our Balsall Heath local plan, which is one of the first local plans which was done in the country, and many of us are very proud of it. All the communities of Balsall Heath voted on it, and it includes, in fact, along the River Ray, and credit to Flatpack Festival, who held last weekend the Hidden River Festival just by the River Ray in Calthorpe Park. And part of our local plan is that we would love that hidden river, which is in a huge culvert sort of many metres down from the level of the street and the pavement. Many people cross it and don't even realise it's there. But in our local plan, there is a visionary proposal to open that up and make a big lake, which is part of it. What a lovely segue from Dan's idea of page, I hope you've noted it down, 179, to check that out. And I think the other work that Fruit and Nut Village have been doing, Dan's been very modest in what he hasn't said about Fruit and Nut Village, but there are so many incredible things. Just one of the pocket parks just between Runcorn Road and Clifton Road, I was there helping people plant gooseberry bushes and perennial edible plants and so forth along there, and it's immediately next to an area where I think we've retrofitted 5 homes all in a row on one side of one of the avenues there. So do check out his website and so forth, and I hope on our social media we can show that. But passing swiftly over, because I know we're running behind, but I'm going to give time to this to this section to Abbas, Shah and Shaheen to talk about Balsall Heath Nature Map, which is now on the screen behind them.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Dan. So I was reflecting on the journey of the absolute privilege of being involved with putting together this nature map. And feels like a few lifetimes of activity in the past year and a half, how it all came together. I've just literally, Jo Ein, the producer, had she wanted to do a nature map of the entire city of Birmingham. And the festival said, no, it's too big, so she scaled down, let's do Balsall Heath. And so it was wonderful just engaging with, Clifton Road Mall, Sultan Bahub, Edward Road Church, with 3 of the partners in the project. And the wonderful artists, so Shaheen was one of the artists, there was Rachel and Dave also, and there was a steering group. And in fact, I have a fond memory of going to a tree grafting workshop by Dan and Rob, and just all the learning. So my daughter had lots of questions about, tree grafting, and I didn't have any answers. So we learnt lots, and on that day, I think we grafted about 5 apple trees. So one for ourselves, one for Nani, for a grandma, and 3 for the centres, the 3 centres that were involved. And they've grown and they've, but then we talked to Rob and Dan, and Rob reached out to the Chamberlain Trust, and they gave us 3 sort of much more robust apple trees that could be planted at the 3 kind of locations. So one of the apple trees was planted at Edward Road, and 2 are being looked after at the other sites until the sites are ready, because one of them is a construction site. And we launched the map last summer with kind of a couple of hundred people over the road at Clifton Road Mosque. And and again, Dan's also a photographer, and he did amazing photographs of people who were involved. And I think the trees were very much part of the journey, actually, because they were present at every event we ever did. They were kind of these, and I think in every photograph of people that were involved as well. Now, normally, I think the whole climate emergency can take people to a place of grief, and almost like a loss and bereavement. And I think this kind of work really kind of takes us somewhere else in terms of how connected we are and how precious these parts of the city are to us. Tiny, tiny pockets that have, I think, already been transformed in the past year in just the work that's been done. I was trying to imagine what it'd be like to have an aerial photograph, a Google Earth of the 20 or so areas, last year, this year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And it will be transformational. There's no ifs or buts, no questions about that. And Dan and Rob both have this immense humility about them, but they really kind of encourage people to engage and learn. And, it's been wonderful, that process. And so on parallel, while we were putting this map together, I also trained as a retrofit coordinator, inspired by John, and we did this course together. And there was really kind of powerful parallels, because, this whole idea of new eyes to nature, new eyes to Balsall Heath, no roads on the map, the paths of bees, the old railway track, but this whole thing of actually the whole new eyes required for retrofit, and what will it take, for people to benefit from these opportunities. And people have had good and bad experiences that were shared. Some were shared yesterday. In December, we were at a NHS conference on inequalities and health. We were presenting with John. And at the same time, Kamran from the Bahu Trust was in Montreal at a biodiversity conference presenting the map. I think it's at the London Building Exhibition as part of this festival. But I think it has a life of its own. I think I can see Shaheen doing one in Small Heath. I can certainly see Joe kind of wanting to repeat a variation on the process in other parts of the city and beyond, actually. Yes. So I'll hand over to Shaheen, one of the wonderful artists who was involved, and also doing lots of work nationwide and globally, actually.
Hello everyone, it's great to be here. I'm a craftivist. I've been an artist in Birmingham for quite a few decades now, a couple of decades. I was born in Burnley, Lancashire. I've been working with maps and looking at borders and boundaries for some time. My work wasn't really that perceived as relevant, but I was looking at the devastation of what people are suffering. And so I was out on a limb, but I just can't get it out of my system. It's sort of like, I can draw pretty pictures, and that's where the money might have been. I don't know, but I carried on, and then I'm going to be really quick and paraphrase a lot of my work. And I was approached by Joe, Abbas, and Kamran, who put me forward for this nature map. And this project came after lockdown, and I was also looking at maps and global suffering, and then different projects. I was at the Lapworth Museum looking at mountains, so looking at the earth and nature was just a progression, and it's been really interesting. It's helped me follow on working within, volunteering actually, working within my own local area. So a lot of people within Small Heath, they are working outside of the area, but it's really interesting actually basing myself within Small Heath, there's not much work. But we want to start that grassroots project and doing lots of similar work like this. And so I think it's an interesting transition, working within my studio, setting up a studio within my own home, looking at my carbon footprint far more closely. And I don't know what else to say, really. So I think, it's just fantastic to be here. So do come and talk to me. I'd love to talk to all of you as well. I hope we can... So I would love to carry on and follow Retrofit around and see what I can do within my area, Small Heath. I think one of the reasons why, just very briefly, why I was taken on as an artist for a Balsall Heath map when I live in Small Heath is because I was termed as an honorary Balsall Heath person. I had a studio opposite at Old Printworks, and so thank you for that. Thanks.
That's lovely, thank you. And let me just extend the invitation that this is a conversation. Anyone who's got contributions from the floor that they'd like to make, do put up your hand at any time. Sorry, I'm making that invitation a bit late in this session. But I just want to offer a reflection which for me was very profound. When we were conceiving the Balsall Heath Nature Map, and it's an alliance, as Abbas has said, of different faith organisations, Balsall Heath Church Centre, the Bahu Trust, and Cameron will be talking for them later, and the Abbas Islamic Centre, and we'll have Sheikh Nuru on the closing panel. But one of the things that was very much in my mind was I was privileged to be up at the COP26 summit in Glasgow a couple of years ago with Kamran, who was one of the panelists there, and we heard from an amazing activist called Elizabeth Watuti from Kenya, who's a young woman, and part of why this is really important for me, and part of what the nature map came out of, is Elizabeth Watuti said this: every time I see a tree cut down, it hurts me to the core. If we feel the loss and pain of nature, our hearts will tell us what needs to be done. My message is for us to find in our hearts to understand what is happening around the world. When we feel, we listen. When we listen, we understand each other. Those of us who understand must not tire. It is us, we who get disturbed. It is us who are called to action. And I felt that was so profound. She's been fantastically eloquent, Elizabeth Watuti, on this. But I think the key point is just feeling that connection with nature. And Dan was so eloquent in, all these references to John Clare, the wonderful nature, the poet of these islands going back 200 years, talking about birds and the loss of ecology and so forth. And we've heard from Abbas and from Shaheen about the nature map. So yes, we had Tokir would like to make a contribution. Do you want to just come forward and take the mic, Tokir, so I don't need to repeat it for everyone?
Put me on the spot now, I'm going to go over it. But what can I say? First of all, I want to say thank you, panelists, and thank you, John, and everyone else who's come here today. I just wanted to say, myself, I'm with Birmingham Black Country Wildlife Trust in Small Heath and in the Eco Park on there, and there's been a lot of work around the River Cove with National Trust. But for me, what's important is legacy. And the question which I want to ask you is that, the people that were involved in the nature back to community, what are your thoughts about taking this forward? Because sustainability, is key to the work that we do. And also a question to Shaheen. In Small Heath, I was speaking to residents and I was speaking to Birmingham Black Country Wildlife Trust. We would like to support yourself, it'd be great to do this in other areas as well. And to continue that legacy work. So that's my question. It's about legacy and how do we continue this kind of work.
Thank you, Tokir. Are there any other burning questions from the floor? Because we're over time with this session, but if anyone else has got anything burning, yes, okay.
It's just a way of saying, I'd like to just say thank you to all the people that have really turned Small Heath Park round. because I have been there in the past when I don't live in this area, when it's been really litter, full of litter, and not well looked after, and a real disappointment. And now I think it's really blooming, isn't it? And a friend of mine, Patricia Earle, and her husband David, I got together a group of people, young people, of many different faiths, I think, and nationalities, and they have made a little peace garden there, I gather. I haven't visited it yet, but I hope that that's going to bloom and be really nice. And the other thing is, do you need a meeting place there? Because we have a brilliant architect here who I'm sure could design a wonderful eco-friendly space, a meeting, covered meeting place for people. Would that be something that would help the community?
We would love that.
So let's just bring everyone into the conversation. Lovely contribution from the floor there, thanking for is it Small Heath Park or is it called?
Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Janet.
Janet's referencing
Small Heath Park, now cleared of litter, and wonderful things happening with different faith communities and other people. Shaheen, do you want to just comment to that? And I think as time is short, we'll just go across the whole panel now to wrap up with any closing reflections on those two contributions from Tokir and Janet, and anything else that's come out of this session. So, Shaheen.
I think the legacy for the map is, if I can say myself, wanting to take the work through to an area that's quite difficult to work within. And so I don't feel we're there to create the map yet. There's so much groundwork to do. I myself have been working within, I live there, but I have been working outside of the city. So we're hoping to create similar projects within Small Heath, but not exhaust ourselves, find the people and local residents to create that work. I'll just...
Yeah, I mean, the Peace Garden you're referring to, Jana, is actually in the Eco Park. But yes, there are groups of young people that clean, Small Heath Park regularly. And yes, there's lots of work to be done and lots of learning. But through this process, what I witnessed was, and especially through the work of Fruit and Nut Village, was, elderly people planting, young people planting, people kind of going to parts of their areas where they don't normally go. But I think it's important also to take this activity to, where people are comfortable, wherever that may be. Because I think that when you graft a fig tree or something that has meaning for someone, or an apple tree for someone, then I think there's a permanent connection with the tree and the place it came from and the people you engaged with on the way, and so that's very present in every of those green spaces you mentioned. I think there's about 21 that I mentioned on this map that have already changed. Yes, and I think there's certainly a thirst. People have a strong desire to, grow things. The way people, I grew up in a home where, coriander, spinach, basics, potatoes were grown in our garden. And it's lovely to see the stuff in the courtyard with the box for the front of a terraced house, But hand over to Dan.
Thank you. With Small Heath Park, I think I don't know Small Heath Park very well, but I think these things very often happen. Changes happen slowly, don't they? And it just it's sort of not being fearful of taking a first step. And I think particularly in public space. I mean, one of the reasons I'm doing this work is I've lived in Balsall Heath longer than I've lived anywhere else. I'm 27 years, something like that, and I always used to look out the back window of my terrace and wonder about the possibilities of using land differently, I suppose, in the way that these islands of green space are kind of encircled and kind of divided up by fences and in a sense you could view that as a kind of a sort of metaphorical possibility in terms of the relationships between people and kind of codependence and building communities that work together. And it's very much like what Retrofit is doing in a kind of architectural sense. And one of the things I was worried about planting fruit trees in parks is, won't they get damaged and stuff, And in reality, the answer is not very often. That's sometimes, but not very often. And we try to do things in a way that makes them resilient until they can, fend for themselves, so to speak. Tokir, in terms of legacy, it sort of made me think, because most of my professional life I've been an artist and a teacher, and I am interested. I was involved in the 100 Swimmers project, the photograph up there, and that's shot on my camera. And I sent a picture to the artist on WhatsApp, Atilia Fumarella, who lives in Portugal now. And one of the reasons that I guess that I've started to do the work involving planting and kind of community stuff is that the legacies of planting projects are different in many ways from the legacies of arts projects, community or otherwise. And the legacy of what we're trying to do, I guess, hopefully in 25 years' time, when the Ray Valley Forest Garden has a kind of a nursery of unusual hawthorn varieties with viable fruit and blossom all year round, that's a legacy that that hopefully others will be wanting to preserve and enjoy. We are actively, planning. We're always, involved in this kind of work. It's always a hustle to try and kind of, work out what plan fits what, rubric of what funder, and we're working on doing that better, with Retrofit and, with other partners to do different kinds of planting using sort of different kind of, methods and working with different, individuals in the community. So one of the intentions of what we do, obviously we can't feed Balsall Heath from one forest garden, and that's not the intention, but one of the, the sort of secondary legacy, or in some senses arguably the primary legacy, is trying to revive and adapt and rebuild and share the knowledge and culture of these kinds of interactions with plants. So that's a kind of, and we do that by doing the work, by going down in the rain in the winter and planting the trees, like as Tony will know. There's a really great permaculture teacher in Mid-Wales, a guy called Steve Jones, who did an introduction to permaculture weekend a few years ago at the Printworks across the road, and he was talking about biochar stoves, top-load updraft stoves, again, appropriate technology, very doable. Another story, but he had a formulation, I guess, which was demonstrate, educate and replicate, I guess. And the beauty of working with natural systems is that once they get started, they can kind of do a lot of that replication on their own, like nature, will build, increasingly complex systems through its own interactions as part of its kind of defining characteristics. So in terms of legacy, we want, what I'd love to see is Balsall Heath being a kind of a forest garden suburb, and the infrastructure, or the ecological infrastructure of the area and the city, be a kind of part of a kind of, almost like unthinkingly a part of the, the structure of government and society and investment in the collective good, as, crazily extractive sewage systems and like fossil fuel systems are now. Like, I guess that would be the ultimate goal, and I think it's small steps, isn't it? But thank you very much for listening.
I mean, there's so much. I feel we're just scratching the surface of this topic. The green shoots are sprouting, but we're way over time. I'm going to wrap up now. We can continue the conversation, but just a final reflection. I think the Balsall Heath forest is such a powerful, emotive thing. It's a heart level connection, isn't it? And I think there is now, amazingly, in the Birmingham plan, an idea that Birmingham, which already has more trees than many other or all other European cities, I can't quite remember remember the statistic, but there is now official policy to make Birmingham a forest, to plant trees all over Birmingham. And I think particularly in Balsall Heath, you see it celebrated in the amazing nature map here. I mean, it's, you know, I think the sort of the number of green spaces there are in Balsall Heath is less than almost any other part of Birmingham, but to celebrate what we do have and to build on that is so important, I think. And I'm reminded of, if we go back 200 years, Birmingham is often commented on by travel writers at that time as a city ringed with gardens. And at that stage, the Guinea Gardens were all around the city, around the periphery. Many of the people who were being sucked into Birmingham were moving to Birmingham because there were jobs, there was all sorts of industrial revolution happening, were people who were moving off the land in rural Warwickshire, Worcestershire, other places, and they took these gardens, they rented them for a guinea. There's not time to tell the whole story, but they were perhaps 6 times the size of a normal allotment we've got now. Those that many have been built over, but those that are left, particularly down by the botanical gardens, are now have listed status. And so I think the vision which Dan and which Abbas and Shaheen have been spelling out here is a reimagining, a reinvention. And many of the people who've moved from Pakistan, my neighbour down the road, whose family still grow amazing mangoes back in Pakistan, and that's a very proud part of their cultural heritage. Many people have connections, first generation connections with the land. My own family, it goes back perhaps 3 or 4 generations, but I think many people who have these connections with land but have come into an urban sort of environment to do particular jobs to do with transport and other things which aren't related to nature. But I think in many ways we're rediscovering watering roots and connections that are already there. So I'll just finish on that note. If you haven't yet seen the Balsall Heath nature map, there's a whole cubicle devoted to it just up here, as with Saheli Women's Project, and we're going to hear from Naseem this afternoon, and many other local projects. So just a huge round of applause, please, for our panellists, Dan, Abbas and Shaheen.